The next point I'd like to make about Eva is that Priestley is very keen to showcase her femininity, the fact that she is a young woman. He's examining what it means to be female at this time, and he's also trying to point out that women are far more vulnerable than men. They've got it even worse. And he does this perhaps to get even more sympathy for his dead working class character, but also you might read his interest as a feminist one. Although this is written in 1945, this could be seen as a campaign for women's rights. So through Eva, he's keen to point out that women are often judged by their looks, not by how they perform at work. Interestingly, Sheila's jealousy means that Eva's looks have actually counted against her. If she hadn't been pretty, Sheila would not have been so jealous and would not have got her sacked. And this is the opposite of the pretty young women in a theatre audience. Those would be likely to be well off and well educated, and their good looks would have been a big asset to them, for example in finding a husband, or perhaps in employment. Next, Priestley wants to point out some of the historical data that I revealed earlier in the census information. So both her parents are dead, which would have been possible for many women because of the mortality rate that we've seen. She hadn't been able to save much and therefore is always vulnerable. She can't cope with periods out of work because she'll have no money, and she's no one to turn back to. There are no relatives. This again gives us the idea of her being rootless when she becomes Daisy. She has few friends because obviously she's having to move to a city where she doesn't know anyone, and also work would have taken up most of the hours in the day, so there's less time to socialise. She's lonely and half-starved. Obviously, Priestley isn't just using Eva to represent all women. He also wants to create a character that we all feel sorry for because of what the family have done to her. He makes the idea that she would change her name seem quite natural, but after that she stopped being Eva Smith. But I don't know, actually, if this is historically an accurate idea. I think this is much more a dramatic device because it allows him to use the symbolism of Eva Smith and Daisy Renton. And of course a further dramatic device is that it allows Gerald to say that they all knew different girls. He, of course, knew a Daisy Renton, and Eric knew a girl who was neither called Eva or Daisy. This is essential for them to be able to deny that they have all contributed to the death of the same girl. This is interesting because if the characters all learn their lesson and accept that they've all been responsible, that implies there would be no second phone call. This is Priestley's way of saying that the second phone call is a result of a lesson not learned. However, a more cynical way of viewing this is to look at Priestley. If we're critical, we can say that he needs the second death to happen in order to educate his audience. So she becomes expendable. There was no way that Eva Smith was going to survive. This will also lead you to ask an interesting question about the mysterious inspector. Does the inspector leave because he needs the family not to learn the lesson, so that somehow, perhaps supernaturally, he can orchestrate the second death of Eva? In other words, in order for the family to learn the lesson, does he need Eva Smith to be expendable? Is he quite that ruthless? But Priestley certainly is. He's created the play, and he does not offer Eva the chance of survival. Perhaps he's saying that that's how it is in real life. Working class women are vulnerable, and many of them do die because of this. and it's because of the way the capitalist system exploits them. To reinforce this idea, he has the inspector say, there are lots of young women living that sort of existence in every city and big town in this country. In other words, Eva is a symbol of everybody. If there weren't, the factories and warehouses wouldn't know where to look for cheap labour, and so now she is a symbol of the corruption of capitalism. The factories, the warehouse owners, they force people to work for little money. Sheila takes the opposite view. They aren't cheap labour, they're people. But of course, Gerald and Burling don't share that view. The inspector does, and what he wants is for us to put ourselves in the place of these young women counting their pennies in their dingy little back rooms. And perhaps this is why we don't meet Eva at any time. If you've watched the Alistair Sim black and white film, you will see all these flashbacks done in the cinema. The same could easily have been done on stage. The set would rotate and we'd quite easily see the characters in flashback with Eva Smith. Perhaps Priestley deliberately does not do this because he wants to make clear to the audience that Eva is not a real person, or rather, she is a symbol of millions of people, and it's her symbolic value that is much more important. Of course, an audience that had just lived through the Second World War would have no difficulty in realising that life is very vulnerable, and in fact chance plays a huge part in whether you survive or not. But Priestley has to give this view for women pre-1914, before the First World War, and he points out here that a bout of influenza could easily lead to your losing your job. And why? Well, because influenza, the flu, was very frequently fatal. People didn't recover from it very frequently. So although Eva's death seems extraordinary in the play, actually Priestley is making the point that death is very common, as you would have seen from the average age on the census that I showed you. I said earlier that we should consider Priestley's role as a feminist. So let's look at this incident here. Sheila has got Eva sacked from her work, and she asked, did it make much difference? Yes, I'm afraid it did. It was the last real steady job she had. When she lost it, for no reason that she could discover, she decided she might as well try another kind of life. If you play a kind of what-if game, she could easily have survived having been sacked from the Burlings. As we see here, she gets a job. But she never gets another job in this play. This is her last chance of security. So one way of reading this is that Sheila is the worst of the characters, until we consider her mother. So Burling, all right, has sacked her, but has given her several months, perhaps a couple of years, of employment. Gerald has had an affair with her, but has given her financial security for a time. Similarly, Eric has done the same, but it's the women, Sheila and Mrs. Burling, who act so cruelly without giving anything in return. Sheila has given Eva nothing, Mrs. Burling has given Eva nothing. So perhaps Priestley is making a point about the powerlessness of women in this society. Sheila has no power to do any good to Eva. She can't really make her life any better because she herself has no power. The only way she can attain power in this play is by having good looks, being pretty, which she is, or by having wealth, being in a wealthy family, or by marrying well with Gerald. And we can see that she's willing to marry Gerald, even though she suspects very strongly that he's been having an affair even before he confesses it. In other words, Priestley's pointing out that the role of women in this society is very, very constricted and exploited by men. If we look a bit deeper, we might argue that women in this play are much worse to each other, because this seems to be the only way they can gain any kind of control in their lives. Priestley now uses Eva to contrast the role of looks in a working class life and an upper class life or an upper middle class life. So Sheila says, if she'd been some miserable, plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it, meaning got her sacked. But she was very pretty and looked as if she could take care of herself. So in Sheila's world, you will be able to take care of yourself if you're pretty, because you will be able to find attention and ultimately marriage from men. In Eva's world, of course, and that's a much larger world because there are many more women in it, that's not true. Being very pretty gets you all kinds of attention from men, but you're just as likely to be exploited as married.